Now, every good movie has to have a well-written story to keep it together. The problem with the third movie is that it has so many stories going on in it. A movie can have a lot of different stories going on and still be good and interesting, but Spider-Man 3 just doesn't handle it well. The intent of the movie, it seemed, was to weave all the different stories together until they all eventually became part of the same overall theme. Which is a good idea, and while it could certainly be pulled off, it's just not done well. Rather than feeling like a lot of little parts of a big whole, it just feels sort of disorienting and confusing. I mean, it's just all over the place. And the weird thing about the third movie is that it seemed to think that if you draw iconic images in from the comics, it means you're drawing in stories as well. And that's just not true. The bell tower scene from the movie had a lot in common visually with the comic books, but the overall story was almost nothing like the traditional Venom story. There's also this really cheesy part about how Spider-Man is now loved by everyone, even going so far as to have him land in front of a brightly lit American flag that's just unfurling brilliantly in the wind. I don't think I've ever seen anything in my life more cheesy than that moment. Spider-Man is not supposed to be universally loved. He's supposed to have people think he's a menace and not want him around. That's one of the reasons that Spider-Man has such great appeal, is the fact that he perseveres through all of that negativity. Taking that away was a big part of why he was so unlikable in the third movie. So it really comes down to the first two movies once again, and both have very classic storylines. The first movie is, of course, the origin story, and the second movie draws heavily from the Spider-Man No More story arc. What's great about the second movie is that it understood that in order to draw well from a comic book, you have to do so with both story and with visuals. The second movie used some iconic images to great effect and really stuck to the Spider-Man No More story arc very well. In terms of the Doc Ock side of things, while they did take some creative liberties with the character, the origin story did for the most part stay fairly close to the comic books. They put in this whole motivation about his wife being killed and him blaming Spider-Man for it, which isn't really a typical Doc Ock story, but it still functions pretty well, and like I said, the origin is otherwise pretty spot on. I really love the first movie as well. The story was tight, coherent, and it flowed very naturally. The characters' motivations were good, and it definitely felt like a comic book in movie form. My only problem with the story is that Green Goblin pursues Spider-Man just a little too actively. For me, Goblin crimes are about Spider-Man catching Green Goblin in the act of something, and Green Goblin trying to make his escape so he can get away with it. And sometimes when Spidey really annoys him, he'll set a few traps here and there. And the first parts of the movie felt a lot like that. Goblin is just going about his business, killing who he wants killed, doing what he wants done, and stealing what he wants stolen. And Spider-Man just happens to catch him in the act, and they become natural enemies. But in the second half of the movie, Goblin just sort of stops doing things for their own sake and just goes after Spider-Man. Now, it is very true that Green Goblin would love to have Spider-Man dead and gone. But that's not really his ultimate goal in life. His goal is power, and he knows that fighting Spider-Man is often counterproductive to that goal. There's certainly elements of that in the movie, like when he kills the board members so that he can keep full control of his company. But then he just kind of stops there, which isn't really Green Goblin's style. The thing about him is that he's never, ever satisfied. He's a business tycoon, and the more power he can get his hands on, the better. Once he gets his company back, he just sort of stops pursuing power and just goes after killing Spider-Man, which isn't really how Goblin stories are supposed to go, in my opinion. So even though I really love the first movie, and even though, again, it's a really close call, I have to say that the second movie takes the final point for story. So there you have it. I've compared the three movies, and in my humble opinion, the second movie is the most superior film. But what do you guys think? If you like, you can leave comments or video responses. Let me know what you think, whether you agree or you disagree. Have a webtastic day, true believers.